The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Maya Chen stepped through the glass doors of Blackstone Security Academy. Her petite 5'2" frame seemed almost childlike next to the hulking security professionals filing into the assessment center. She clutched her worn backpack tightly, feeling the familiar weight of her competition gloves inside. The expensive tactical gear and military-style haircuts of the other candidates made her simple ponytail and thrift store combat pants look woefully out of place. Maya paused momentarily, watching the confident candidates strut toward the registration desk like they already had their certifications in hand. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Blackstone Elite Protection Assessment was legendary in personal security circles, a grueling evaluation that separated amateur martial artists from legitimate executive protection specialists. Maya had applied 3 months ago, using her modest savings from working as a behavioral analysis consultant for a tech firm. The application fee alone had cost her a month's rent, but she couldn't pass up the opportunity. Blackstone certification meant international recognition, high-profile clients, and a chance to prove that effective protection didn't always come in a 6 feet 4 inches package. Maya Chen, she said quietly, sliding her confirmation email across the registration desk. The woman behind the counter, whose name tag read Diana Reeves, Assessment Director, glanced up briefly. Her eyes flicked to Maya's petite frame, then back to her tablet, a slight smirk tugging at her lips. Lane 14, lowest priority assessment. Diana pointed toward a far corner of the training facility. Try not to get hurt out there, sweetheart. Heat flushed Maya's cheeks, but she simply nodded and walked away. Around her, the atmosphere hummed with testosterone and pre-assessment boasting. Men unpacked specialized gloves, custom impact gear, and compression clothing from major tactical brands that cost more than her monthly salary. She found her assigned station in a poorly lit corner of the facility, separated from the premium assessment lanes by empty equipment racks. Her neighbors barely acknowledged her presence, too busy comparing their professional credentials and previous military deployments. Maya unpacked methodically, her grandfather's hand-sewn judo gi, basic hand wraps, and a worn notebook filled with techniques passed down through 3 generations of Wing Chun practitioners. Her family's martial arts lineage stretched back to Hong Kong, though you'd never know it from her unassuming appearance. Well, came a deep voice behind her. Looks like someone took a wrong turn from the women's self-defense class. Maya turned to see Jackson Reed, a former Army Ranger whose face appeared on every tactical training magazine and security certification program. His reputation preceded him, 4-time Blackstone Elite recipient, social media celebrity, and founder of Reed Tactical Solutions, a private security firm that protected Silicon Valley executives. He stood with his entourage, arms crossed, studying her setup like she was an amusing curiosity at a museum exhibit. "This is Executive Protection Assessment, little lady," Jackson continued, loud enough for nearby candidates to hear. "Not a karate demonstration at the community center." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Maya felt dozens of eyes on her, phones already starting to point in her direction. The Blackstone assessment was being recorded for training purposes, and she was apparently about to become viral content. "Know what this is?" Maya replied evenly, adjusting her GI's collar. Jackson's smile turned predatory. "Do you?" "Because this isn't about participation trophies. We're assessing against armed attackers with simulated weapons. Men have been training for decades perfecting these techniques. You sure you can handle that kind of pressure?" The condescension in his voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. Maya's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd heard variations of this speech her entire life, in college psychology classes, at martial arts competitions, anywhere she dared to enter male-dominated spaces. "I guess we'll find out," she said simply, as Jackson walked away, chuckling with his crew. Maya tried to ignore the whispers that followed. She was used to being underestimated, but something about this felt different, more hostile, more personal. She glanced at her notebook filled with techniques she'd practiced thousands of times. Her grandfather had taught her to fight on their small apartment balcony in Chicago, passing down not just martial arts movements, but the philosophical precision behind them. "Fighting is just applied physics," he'd always say. "If you understand the levers, the momentum, and the weak points, size becomes irrelevant." The facility's PA system crackled to life. Candidates prepare for the initial assessment phase. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's see what you're made of." Maya settled into her starting position, trying to block out the snickers and camera clicks around her. She had no idea that her real test was just beginning. The first assessment phase started with basic fitness drills, nothing Maya couldn't handle. Though the smirks when she completed her pull-ups with perfect form suggested many had expected her to fail immediately. The real mockery began during the technical demonstrations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Candidates were asked to demonstrate defensive techniques against a single padded attacker. Maya's approach was methodical, redirecting energy, rather than matching it, using leverage instead of strength. When the assessor lunged at her, she sidestepped smoothly, guiding his momentum past her while maintaining perfect balance. "Not bad for a beginner," someone called out, the sarcasm unmistakable. Victor Sullivan, the events supervisor and a former military contractor, spoke into his microphone with theatrical flair. "Well, folks, our pocket-sized candidate in lane 14 manages to avoid getting completely flattened. Progress." Laughter erupted from the gallery. Maya's face burned, but she kept her focus downrange, preparing for the next drill. Her second demonstration was even better, cleanly disarming the padded attacker with a wrist lock that forced him to release the rubber training knife. It was respectable technique by any measure, but the crowd seemed determined to find fault. "3 moves for 1 disarm," observed Cameron Scott, a tactical instructor from Texas who'd been posting assessment videos on social media for years. He held up his tablet showing his own demonstration. "That's what happens when you don't have real-world experience. Efficiency matters when your principal's safety is on the line." Cameron's comment stung because it revealed how little he understood about her approach. While others relied on brute force and intimidation, Maya used precise targeting of nerve points and joint manipulations. Her notebook contained pages of anatomical diagrams with pressure points and biomechanical weaknesses that she'd studied obsessively. At the 45-minute mark, the difficulty increased significantly. 2 attackers approached simultaneously, wielding foam batons. Maya took extra time with her preparation, focusing on positioning and environmental awareness. This methodical approach drew more mockery. "Is she meditating out there?" Jackson called out from his assessment lane. "Maybe she should have brought some incense too." Reed's joke hit closer to home than he knew. Maya had indeed brought centering techniques from her meditation practice, which helped her maintain focus under pressure. When she successfully defended against both attackers, redirecting one into the other, her technique was so smooth that instead of acknowledgement, she heard whispers about beginner's luck. Victor Sullivan approached her station during the break, ostensibly to check equipment, but clearly looking for problems. He examined her hand wraps with exaggerated scrutiny, measuring this and that with obvious skepticism. "These wraps aren't regulation," he announced, loud enough for others to hear. "Safety concern. You'll need to have them inspected before the next round." Maya knew her equipment was proper. She'd verified everything twice before arriving, but she also knew better than to argue with an assessor in front of a crowd. She spent her break time rechecking raps that didn't need checking, feeling like a student being singled out by a hostile teacher. During the weapons defense round, the harassment escalated. Someone accidentally bumped her station while she was adjusting her GI, causing her to stumble slightly. When she politely asked for space, she was met with exaggerated apologies that fooled no one. "Oops, sorry about that," said the offender, a middle-aged man with a tactical beard and a private security company logo on his shirt. "Didn't see you." Down there, the facility's monitors displayed the assessment feed, and Maya noticed that cameras seemed to linger on her station longer than others. Victor Sullivan seemed to delight in highlighting her every move on the official commentary. "The internet wants to know if Lane 14 brought pepper spray instead of actual skills," Victor announced with theatrical timing. "I have to say, folks, the optics aren't great." The pun on optics, referring both to her glasses and her appearance, drew huge laughs from the crowd. Maya felt her cheeks burning with humiliation, but she kept her mouth shut and her eyes on her next assessment task. As the day progressed, she noticed a pattern. When male candidates made mistakes, they were met with supportive comments or gentle ribbing. When she made identical errors, they became evidence of her fundamental unsuitability for the profession. Her successes were minimized or explained away, while her failures were magnified and broadcast. But something else was happening too. Her demonstrations were getting more precise, her movements more fluid, and despite the hostile environment, she was slowly, quietly climbing the assessment rankings. Jackson Reed noticed too. During the lunch break, he made a point of walking past her station, speaking just loud enough for others to hear. "Must be nice having everyone watching your little kung fu show," he said with false sympathy. "Hope you're ready for the afternoon scenarios. Things get real serious with the multiple attackers. That's where we separate the hobbyists from the professionals." Maya looked up from her notebook, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. Something in her expression made Jackson's smile falter slightly. "I'll be ready," she replied. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across his face. Then he recovered his swagger and walked away. But Maya had seen it, the first crack in his armor of contempt. The afternoon sun streamed through the facility's high windows as candidates prepared for the advanced scenario assessments. Maya wiped sweat from her forehead, trying to ignore the growing crowd of spectators who seemed more interested in watching her fail than appreciating good technique. The assessment livestream viewer count had tripled, and she'd become the unofficial entertainment of the day. Her demonstrations had improved steadily through the morning rounds, and she'd quietly moved into the middle of the rankings. This progress hadn't gone unnoticed by Jackson Reed and his crew, who seemed increasingly irritated by her persistence. "Beginner's luck has to run out sometime," Cameron Scott muttered as he passed her station, loud enough for nearby microphones to pick up. Reality doesn't care about feel-good stories. Maya was adjusting her GI when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Her water bottle, the carefully prepared electrolyte mix she'd brought to stay hydrated through the grueling assessment, had been tampered with. The seal was broken, and when she cautiously smelled it, she detected a faint alcoholic odor. That shouldn't have been there. Her stomach dropped. Someone had spiked her drink, presumably to make her appear intoxicated during her demonstrations. Without proper hydration, her performance would suffer significantly in the later rounds. "Excuse me," she said to Diana Reeves as the assessment director walked past. "Someone has tampered with my water." Deanna barely slowed down. "Personal items are the candidate's responsibility. Maybe keep better track of your belongings." The dismissal was so casual, so obviously unfair, that Maya felt her composure crack. She looked around for support, but found only averted eyes and uncomfortable expressions. The other candidates suddenly seemed very interested in their own equipment. Victor Sullivan's voice boomed over the PA system. "Candidates to their stations. For the advanced scenarios." This is where we start separating the real protection specialists from the hobbyists, folks. Maya forced herself to focus. She'd come too far to let sabotage stop her now. She'd have to complete the assessment without proper hydration. No room for mistakes, no mulligans, no second chances. As she settled into her ready position, she noticed Elena Rodriguez, an older Latina woman, assessing in a nearby lane, giving her a subtle nod of encouragement. Elena was one of the few candidates who hadn't joined in the mockery, and her expression now held something like respect. The advanced scenario was a different beast entirely. 4 attackers would approach simultaneously, wielding various training weapons in a simulation of a real-world protection scenario. The target was to protect the principal, a dummy in a business suit, while neutralizing threats without excessive force. Maya took her time preparing, visualizing the scenario and planning her positioning. The crowd grew restless with her methodical approach. "Any time now, Tiny," someone called out. "We don't have all day." "Maybe she's waiting for the attackers to get tired and go home," another voice added, generating more laughter. Maya blocked them out, focusing on her breathing and the physical principles that governed efficient movement. Her grandfather had always said that fighting was just applied physics. If you understood the variables, you could predict the outcome. Her first engagement with the 4 attackers was solid but not perfect. She managed to protect the principal, but one attacker got close enough to score what would have been a grazing hit in a real scenario. The crowd reacted with mock applause. "Participation trophy right there," Jackson announced to his followers. "That's what happens when you let YouTube tutorials replace actual training." But Maya was already analyzing what had gone wrong. The attackers had coordinated better than she anticipated, creating a distraction on her left while the primary threat approached from the right. She adjusted her strategy and prepared for the second attempt. "Better," Elena Rodriguez said quietly, just loud enough for Maya to hear. "Trust your training." The comment was simple, but it reminded Maya of something crucial. Her calculations were good. She'd spent years preparing, practicing scenarios, analyzing variables that most martial artists never considered. Her grandfather's training had been thorough, and her psychology background gave her tools that others lacked, the ability to read intention before movement began. Her second scenario attempt was markedly better. She maintained perfect positioning between the threats and the principal, redirecting attacks with minimal contact and using the attacker's momentum against them. She disarmed 2 attackers in quick succession, using their own weapons to control the remaining threats. The crowd's reaction was notably muted. Jackson Reed glanced over at her performance, his expression darkening. "Got lucky with the attack pattern," he said dismissively, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. As they moved to the final scenario, the ultimate test that would determine who received Blackstone Elite certification, Maya noticed the atmosphere beginning to shift. The easy mockery was being replaced by something more hostile, a growing realization that she might actually be competitive. The jokes became nastier, the accidents more frequent. During her preparation for the final scenario, someone knocked over her water bottle, spilling the remaining liquid across the floor near her station. When she asked for a moment to clean up the potential safety hazard, Victor Sullivan shook his head. "Assessment schedule doesn't accommodate cleanup time," he announced officially. "Candidates adapt to the environment, or they don't." Maya was forced to work around the slippery floor, adding another variable to an already complex scenario. But again, her techniques remained precise, not perfect, but consistent enough to keep her in contention. The breaking point came during the final preparation period. Maya was reviewing her mental checklist when she overheard Jackson talking to Victor Sullivan near the assessor's station. "This whole thing's becoming a circus," Jackson was saying, his voice tight with frustration. "We're supposed to be evaluating serious protection specialists, not turning this into some diversity showcase. The profession has standards for a reason, Victor nodded sympathetically. Don't worry. Reality has a way of asserting itself in the final scenario. That's where the pretenders get exposed. Maya felt something cold settle in her chest. This wasn't just about outperforming her anymore. It was about ensuring she failed publicly and spectacularly. They wanted her humiliation to be complete and broadcast to thousands of viewers. She thought about her grandfather, about the patient. Hours he'd spent teaching her, not just to fight, but to think like a strategic protector. About the late nights she'd spent analyzing attack patterns and human behavior, preparing for moments exactly like this. About every condescending comment and dismissive look she'd endured throughout her career. Maya closed her eyes momentarily and centered herself. She had one final scenario to complete, and she was going to make it count. The crowd pressed closer as candidates prepared for the final assessment. Cameras focused on the top contenders, but Maya noticed several lenses pointed her way too. Win or lose, she'd become part of the story. Ladies and gentlemen, Victor announced with theatrical drama. This is what we've all been waiting for. The elite protection scenario, the ultimate test of professional against multiple armed assailants. Maya almost smiled at his choice of words. Professional against assailants indeed. The sun reached its peak through the facility skylights, casting harsh shadows across the Blackstone assessment floor. Maya found herself in an unexpected position. Despite the sabotage, harassment, and hostile environment, she'd managed to stay competitive through sheer determination and superior technique. The final scenario would determine who received elite certification, and she was still in the running. During the extended break before the championship round, Maya retreated to the locker room to center herself and review her strategy. She needed absolute clarity for what was coming. As she sat quietly in a corner, eyes closed in meditation, a gentle tap on her shoulder made her look up. Elena Rodriguez stood there, holding 2 sealed bottles of water and wearing a concerned expression. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" she asked. Maya hesitated. She'd been burned by false friendships before, but something in Elena's demeanor seemed genuine. She nodded, making space on the bench. "Rough day," Elena said, settling beside her and handing her a water bottle. "I've been in this industry for 15 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this." Maya took a sip of water, studying Elena's face. Unlike the younger competitors, Elena carried herself without arrogance, with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. "You're performing well," Elena continued. "Better than most of them want to admit. Your techniques are precise, and your spatial awareness," she gestured at Maya's stance. "That's old-school excellence. Your grandfather teach you?" Maya nodded, surprised by her insight. Wing Chun practitioner, Hong Kong lineage. He always said fighting was just physics with consequences. Elena smiled. "Smart man. I knew a few like him." She paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "Listen, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I overheard Jackson talking to some of the other guys during lunch. They're planning something for the final scenario." Maya's stomach tightened. "What kind of something?" "Nothing they could get disqualified for, but enough to throw you off. The 4 attackers in your scenario have been instructed to go full intensity, no holding back like they normally would. They want you to fold under pressure." Elena's expression was grim. "It's not right, but it's also not entirely unexpected. This industry has a culture problem." Maya felt a mix of anger and disappointment. She'd hoped that excellence would speak for itself, that her performance would eventually earn respect. Instead, she was facing organized sabotage. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Elena was quiet for a moment, looking down at her calloused hands. "I have 2 daughters, both of them smarter than me, both of them tougher than they should have to be. I've watched them face this kind of garbage in their own careers." She looked at Maya directly. Plus, your technique reminds me of someone I knew in private security years ago. A man named Chun. Any relation? Maya's breath caught. Li Chun was my grandfather. Elena's eyes widened. Li Chun? Master Chun from the Hong Kong Executive Protection Unit? Hell, I trained under him briefly in '99. Best close protection specialist I ever met. And that includes 15 years of working with presidential details. She shook her head in amazement. That man could read an attacker's intention before they even moved. Taught me more about protective positioning in 6 weeks than I learned in 5 years of agency training. Suddenly, everything made more sense. Her grandfather's patient lessons, his insistence on psychological awareness, his emphasis on thinking through scenarios rather than just reacting to them. He'd been training her for more than just martial arts competitions. He'd been preparing her for moments exactly like this. He talked about you, Maya said softly. Always said his American students were too focused on equipment to appreciate proper technique. Elena laughed. Sounds like Master Chun. Blunt as hell, but usually right. Her expression grew serious. He'd be proud of how you're handling this. That kind of grace under pressure can't be taught. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The weight of family legacy settling between them. Maya felt something she hadn't experienced all day, validation, from someone who understood both her grandfather's teachings and the challenges she faced. I need to ask you something, Elena said. Your techniques today, they're all traditional, aren't they? No modern adaptations? Maya nodded. Grandfather insisted on it. Said trendy systems come and go, but physics is eternal. Elena whistled. Lo, do you realize what that means? Every other candidate out here is using hybrid tactical systems, military-derived techniques, equipment-heavy approaches. You're using methods that are centuries old, and despite that perceived disadvantage, you're still in contention. The implications hit Maya like a revelation. She'd been competing with one hand tied behind her back, using methods that many considered outdated, while her competitors relied on cutting-edge tactical training. And despite that supposed disadvantage, she was still performing at their level. There's something else, Elena continued. I did some research during lunch. The behavioral analysis firm you work for, Meridian Dynamics, they consult for executive protection teams, don't they? Maya's pulse quickened. Threat assessment and behavioral prediction. I designed the training modules that teach bodyguards to recognize pre-attack indicators. Elena's expression shifted to something approaching awe. Jesus Christ. You wrote the training materials half these guys studied to get their certifications. The irony was almost overwhelming. Her own psychological assessment frameworks were being used by competitors who saw her as fundamentally inferior. She'd literally created the threat recognition systems they depended on, while choosing to rely on more traditional physical methods herself. That's actually hilarious, Maya said, feeling a smile tug at her lips for the first time all day. It's more than hilarious, Elena replied. It's poetic justice waiting to happen. As they prepared to return to the assessment floor, Elena placed a maternal hand on Maya's shoulder. Your grandfather saw something in you worth developing, she said. Trust his training, trust your instincts, and don't let these bastards take away what you've earned. Maya nodded, feeling a new kind of confidence settling over her. She wasn't just carrying her own hopes anymore. She was honoring a legacy, proving a point, and maybe even changing a culture. As she walked back toward Lane 14, Maya noticed the crowd had grown significantly. Word had spread about the underdog analyst who was competing with traditional techniques against modern tactical methods. Some spectators seemed genuinely curious to see what would happen. Others appeared to be hoping for a spectacular failure. Jackson Reed watched her approach with undisguised hostility. His earlier confidence had been replaced by something sharper and more desperate. He'd built his reputation on domination and the possibility of being outperformed by someone he'd publicly mocked, was clearly bothering him. "Final round, sweetheart," he called out as she passed. "This is where reality sets in. 4 trained attackers doesn't forgive amateurs." Maya paused, meeting his gaze with new resolve. "No," she said calmly. "It doesn't." The certainty in her voice seemed to unnerve him. For the first time all day, Jackson Reed looked genuinely worried. The tension at Blackstone Security Academy had reached a breaking point as candidates prepared for the final elite protection scenario. Maya's steady climb up the assessment rankings had transformed what should have been a routine victory for Jackson Reed into something resembling a crisis. The security industry's established hierarchy was being challenged by someone they had dismissed as a novelty. Maya was adjusting her GI when she noticed Diana Reeves approaching with an official-looking clipboard and a stern expression. 2 other assessors flanked her, creating an obvious display of authority that drew the attention of nearby candidates and spectators. "Miss Chen," Diana announced loudly enough for cameras to pick up, "we need to conduct an equipment inspection before the final scenario." Maya looked up, confused. "An inspection? Has someone complained about my equipment?" "Safety protocols," Diana replied curtly. "Given the unusual circumstances of today's assessment, we want to ensure everything meets regulation standards." The unusual circumstances clearly referred to her unexpected competitiveness, but Maya knew better than to argue in front of the crowd. She stood back as the officials examined her hand wraps and GI with exaggerated thoroughness, checking components that had been deemed acceptable all day. "These hand wraps appear non-regulation," one assessor muttered loud enough for spectators to hear. "Could be considered performance-enhancing." Maya's heart sank. The wraps were identical to several others being used in the assessment, but she realized this wasn't really about equipment compliance. This was about finding a reason to disqualify her before she could embarrass the established favorites. "The wraps are within specifications," she said firmly. "They were approved during morning inspection." Diana consulted her clipboard with theatrical seriousness. "Regulations can be interpreted differently depending on circumstances. Given the high-stakes nature of the final scenario, we're applying enhanced scrutiny." Translation: they were changing the rules because she was winning. Elena Rodriguez had been watching the interaction from her nearby station. She approached the group with the confident bearing of someone who'd been part of this industry for decades. "Diana," she said conversationally, "those are the same standard wraps I've been using for years. Same ones Jackson has in his gear bag." She gestured toward Reed's equipment table. "You're going to inspect everyone's gear with this level of thoroughness?" Diana's jaw tightened. She clearly hadn't expected pushback from an established professional. "We're following standard protocols, Elena." "Standard protocols, my ass," Elena replied, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned respect through years of honest work and fair play. "This is an intimidation tactic, and everyone here knows it." A murmur ran through the growing crowd of spectators. Several candidates had stopped their own preparations to watch the confrontation unfold. Maya noticed phones being raised to record the exchange. Jackson Reed materialized at the edge of the group, ostensibly curious, but clearly invested in the outcome. "Problem here?" he asked with false concern. "No problem," Maya said, looking directly at Diana, "unless following the same rules as everyone else is somehow problematic." Her tone was calm, but there was steel beneath it. She'd spent her entire career dealing with people who moved goalposts when they couldn't win on merit. This wasn't her first experience with institutional bias. Diana seemed to realize she was walking into a public relations disaster. The livestream chat was already buzzing with comments about rigged assessments and industry gatekeeping. Several spectators were openly recording the interaction on their phones. "Equipment passes inspection," she announced abruptly, clearly hoping to end the scene before it escalated further. But Jackson wasn't ready to let it go. "Still seems pretty convenient," he said with a smirk. Outsider shows up with basic equipment and suddenly performs like a movie stunt woman. Makes you wonder what else might be non-standard. The implication was clear and deeply offensive. Maya felt her cheeks burn with anger, but Alina stepped forward before she could respond. "You want to make accusations, Jackson?" Elena's voice carried decades of quiet authority. "Because I've been watching all day, and the only thing non-standard here is the way you and your crew have been treating a fellow candidate. I'm starting to wonder if you're afraid of a fair assessment." "I'm just saying," Jackson began. "You're saying a lot of things," Alina interrupted, "most of them wrong. This woman has outperformed half the field using techniques older than your Instagram account. Maybe instead of looking for conspiracies, you should focus on the fundamentals your sponsors pay you to demonstrate." The verbal slap hit its target. Jackson's face flushed red, and for a moment, Maya thought he might actually throw a punch. The tension was broken by Victor Sullivan's voice over the PA system. "Candidates to their stations. Final scenario begins in 10 minutes. As the crowd dispersed, Maya found herself shaking slightly, not from nerves but from suppressed rage. The systematic attempts to undermine her had crystallized something in her mind. This wasn't just about passing an assessment anymore. It was about proving that excellence couldn't be dismissed, diminished, or disqualified by prejudice. "You okay?" Alina asked quietly as they returned to their stations. "I'm perfect," Maya replied, and for the first time all day, she meant it. She opened her notebook to the final page of techniques, reviewing the movements she'd practiced thousands of times. Defense against multiple attackers, control of chaotic situations, protection of the principal, all core teachings from her grandfather, refined through years of practical application. Around her, candidates were making final adjustments to their tactical gear, checking body armor and position of their training weapons. Several were reviewing attack patterns on tablets, loaded with the latest threat assessment software, programs Maya had helped design at Meridian Dynamics. Maya allowed herself a small smile. They had no idea they were relying on her work to try to beat her. Victor Sullivan's voice boomed across the facility. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is it, the elite protection scenario. 4 trained attackers. 1 principal to protect, 10 seconds to neutralize all threats. Let's see who's got what it takes." Maya settled into her ready stance, feeling the familiar calm of complete preparation wash over her. The 4 attackers positioned themselves around the training area, each holding different weapons: knife, baton, simulated firearm, and bare hands. The principal dummy stood in the center, dressed in an executive suit. She closed her eyes. For a moment, hearing her grandfather's voice, "The mind controls the body, Maya. See the outcome before it happens. Trust your training and trust yourself." When she opened her eyes, Maya Chen was ready to show them exactly what trust looked like. The silence at Blackstone Academy was absolute as Maya settled into her final ready position. 4 trained attackers stood at different points around her, their expressions betraying unusual intensity. She'd drawn the final assessment slot, lane 14, last to perform, with everyone else's scores already posted on the electronic board. Jackson Reed held the lead with an impressive 94 out of 100, followed closely by Cameron Scott at 92. Maya needed at least 95 to win, and anything less than 90 would drop her out of the top tier entirely. The pressure should have been overwhelming, but instead Maya felt a strange calm settling over her. Her grandfather's teachings echoed in her mind, not just martial arts techniques, but the psychological principles that made them effective. "The final elite protection scenario," Victor announced over the PA system, his voice carrying a newfound gravity that hadn't been there in the morning. "This is what separates professionals from pretenders." Maya ignored the commentary and focused on her breathing. 4 counts in, hold for 4, release for 4. Her pulse slowed, her vision sharpened, and the training area seemed to expand in her perception. Position was the critical factor in protection scenarios. She'd been analyzing spatial relationships all day, noting how attackers tended to coordinate their movements in predictable patterns. Right now, she could already see the strategy they would attempt. The primary threat would come from her blind side, while the others created distractions. She made her final mental preparations, visualizing each potential attack vector and her corresponding response. The physics of combat played out in her mind like a familiar dance. Action, reaction, redirection, neutralization. Elena Rodriguez, who had finished her own assessment, stood at the edge of the observation area. Their eyes met briefly, and Elena gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Maya settled deeper into her stance, feeling her body align with perfect balance. Through her peripheral vision, she could see the attackers shifting slightly, preparing for their coordinated assault. Behind her, she heard Jackson Reed muttering to his crew, "No way she handles 4 guys at once. Physics doesn't lie, mass. And reach advantage always wins." The irony wasn't lost on her. Jackson was absolutely right. Physics didn't lie. But he had no idea how deeply she understood those physics. How many thousands of hours she'd spent analyzing the biomechanics of efficient movement. How her psychology background had taught her to read pre-attack indicators that most people missed entirely. Maya's breathing slowed to almost nothing as she centered her weight perfectly. The world narrowed to just her, the principal, and the 4 attackers preparing to move. "Begin scenario," Victor announced. The attackers moved with practiced coordination, closing in from different angles. They were faster and more aggressive than they'd been with other candidates, no holding back, just as Elena had warned. This was meant to be her public humiliation. The first attacker, knife wielder, lunged from the right while the baton-armed opponent circled left. The unarmed attacker moved straight ahead as distraction, while the simulated gunman established position for a clear shot. Time seemed to slow down for Maya as her training took over. Rather than retreating or defending, she did the unexpected. She stepped forward, directly toward the unarmed attacker. The movement was so contrary to what they anticipated that it created a momentary hesitation in their coordinated attack. That split second was all she needed. Maya redirected the unarmed attacker with a subtle hip check that sent him stumbling into the path of the knife wielder. As they collided, she continued her movement, stepping into the baton attacker's blind spot and executing a perfect wrist lock that caused him to drop his weapon with a cry of pain. Without pausing, she secured the baton and used it to deflect the recovered knife attacker's thrust, guiding the blade safely away from the principal. A precise strike to the attacker's radial nerve caused involuntary finger extension. The knife clattered to the floor. The gunman, momentarily confused by the rapidly changing scenario, hesitated just long enough for Maya to close distance. She didn't attempt to grab the weapon, a common mistake made by those with less training. Instead, she controlled the attacker's elbow and shoulder, manipulating the joints to direct the weapon away from the principal, while simultaneously sweeping his supporting leg. As the gunman fell, Maya secured the weapon and used the attacker's momentum to roll him into a controlled position. The unarmed attacker, recovering from his initial stumble, made one final attempt to reach the principal. Maya intercepted him with precise timing, using his forward momentum to direct him into a joint lock that immobilized him instantly. 4 attackers, neutralized. Principal, untouched. Total elapsed time, 8.7 seconds. The silence stretched for another heartbeat before Victor Sullivan's voice exploded across the facility. Scenario complete. All threats neutralized in under 10 seconds. Principal secure. The crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers, gasps, and stunned silence. Maya remained in her final position for several seconds, hardly believing what had just happened. Then Elena Rodriguez was pulling her to her feet, grinning like a proud mentor. "Absolutely textbook, Chun. Your grandfather would be dancing." Camera crews rushed toward her position, but Maya barely noticed. She was looking at the assessment board where her score had just appeared, 98 out of 100, the highest of the day by a significant margin. Below her, Jackson Reed stared at the numbers in apparent disbelief. "How?" he muttered, loud enough for nearby microphones to pick up. "How is that even possible at her size?" Maya heard the question and turned to face him directly. For the first time all day, she allowed herself a smile. "Physics," she said simply. Victor Sullivan appeared at her side with a microphone, his earlier condescension replaced by genuine awe. "Maya Chen, ladies and gentlemen. From lowest priority to highest score with a record-setting scenario time. Maya, how does it feel?" Maya looked out at the crowd, some cheering, some still processing what they'd witnessed, others frantically checking their phones to understand how the day's narrative had just been completely rewritten. "It feels like validation," she said into the microphone, her voice carrying clearly across the facility. "Size doesn't determine capability. Technique and understanding do." Behind the crowd, she noticed Deanna Reeves standing with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Their eyes met across the distance, and Maya saw something that might have been respect flickering in her gaze. But the real satisfaction came from watching Jackson Reed pack up his equipment in stunned silence. The man who had dismissed her as a diversity stunt just hours earlier now couldn't meet her eyes. His entourage had melted away, leaving him alone with his expensive gear and wounded pride. "Maya," a young voice called out from the crowd. She turned to see a teenage girl pushing through the spectators, her father trailing behind with an apologetic expression. "My daughter insisted on meeting you," the man explained. "She's been following the livestream all day." The girl, maybe 15, with bright eyes and determined expression, looked up at Maya with unmistakable hero worship. "That was incredible," she breathed. "I've never seen anything like it. They were so much bigger than you, but you made it look so easy." Maya knelt down to the girl's level. "What's your name, Sophia?" "Sophia Williams. I just started training in Krav Maga, but everyone says I'm too small to ever do real protection work." "Size has nothing to do with effectiveness, Sophia," Maya said gently. "It's about understanding mechanics and psychology. Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do." As Sophia and her father moved away, chatting excitedly about technique and training, Maya felt something shift inside her. This victory wasn't just personal anymore, it was symbolic. A demonstration that excellence couldn't be diminished by prejudice, that competence spoke louder than condescension. The awards ceremony was a surreal experience. Maya stood on the podium holding a certification that felt heavier than it should, listening to Victor Sullivan deliver remarks that bore no resemblance to his earlier commentary. The livestream chat, which had been filled with mockery hours earlier, now buzzed with respect and admiration. But the moment that mattered most came as she was packing up her grandfather's notebook. Elena Rodriguez approached with something. In her hand, a faded photograph showing two young martial artists in traditional gi. "Thought you might like to see this," she said. "Your grandfather and me, Hong Kong, 1999. I was his least talented student, but he was still patient." Maya studied the photo, seeing her grandfather's familiar gentle smile and recognizing the same quiet confidence she'd grown up admiring. In the picture, he was demonstrating a joint lock not unlike the one she just used to win her certification. "He always said technique was just applied psychology," she murmured. "Smart man," Elena replied. "But he also said something else about you. Said you had the gift, not just for martial arts, but for understanding people." Guess he was right. As Maya drove away from Blackstone Academy, her certification secured in her bag and her grandfather's notebook safely tucked in her pocket, she couldn't help but smile. Her phone had been buzzing with interview requests, job offers, and messages of congratulation from colleagues who'd followed the live stream. But the message that meant the most was a simple text from her boss at Meridian Dynamics. "Watch the whole thing. Proud to have you leading our training division. Take Monday off, you've earned it." Maya Chen had entered Blackstone Academy as an underestimated analyst with borrowed techniques and a family legacy. She was leaving as an elite certified protection specialist, carrying forward that legacy and proving that excellence needed no permission to announce itself. The week following Maya's victory at Blackstone Security Academy brought consequences that rippled far beyond the executive protection community. Video clips of her disarming 4 attackers in under 9 seconds had gone viral, accumulating millions of views and sparking conversations about size bias in tactical professions. More importantly for those who had tried to sabotage her, the footage also captured every moment of harassment, bias, and unprofessional conduct she'd endured. Maya returned to work at Meridian Dynamics on Tuesday to find her inbox flooded with media requests and her desk decorated with congratulatory cards from colleagues. But the most significant development came during her morning meeting with Dr. Natalie Wilson, the company's director of operations. "Maya, we need to discuss the publicity from your assessment," Dr. Wilson began, settling into the chair across from Maya's desk. "Specifically, the fact that our lead behavioral analyst just demonstrated the superiority of traditional techniques over the tactical systems everyone else was using." Maya felt a moment of concern. Had her victory somehow embarrassed the company whose modern assessment program she'd helped develop? "The thing is," Dr. Wilson continued with a growing smile, "it turns out having a world-class protection specialist as our training division head is incredibly good for business. We've had 15 major security firms reach out since Sunday, all wanting to discuss our threat assessment curriculum. Apparently, they're very interested in training developed by someone who can actually walk the walk." The irony was delicious. Maya's traditional victory had somehow validated the modern psychology-based approaches she'd helped create, proving that the behavioral analysis was sound because it was developed by someone who understood protection principles at their most fundamental level. "There's more," Dr. Wilson continued, sliding a tablet across the desk. "The Department of Diplomatic Security called this morning. They're interested in implementing your pre-attack indicator program for their overseas protection details. This could be our biggest government contract yet." Maya scanned the preliminary proposal, hardly believing what she was seeing. She'd spent years developing these training modules, often facing skepticism from traditional security professionals who doubted that psychology-based approaches could complement physical techniques. Now those same organizations were scrambling to implement her methods. But the real satisfaction came from the phone call she received that Wednesday afternoon. "Ms. Chen? This is Richard Blackwell from the International Protection Specialists Association. I'm calling to inform you that we've received several complaints about the conduct at last weekend's Blackstone assessment." Maya listened as Blackwell detailed a formal investigation into the Academy's practices. Multiple spectators had submitted video evidence of biased evaluation, harassment, and attempts to manipulate equipment inspections. The IPSA took such matters seriously, particularly when they were broadcast to thousands of viewers. "What does that mean practically?" Maya asked. "Well, for starters, Deanna Reeves has been suspended from her position as assessment director pending a full review. The Blackstone facility is being placed on probation, and their authorization to issue elite certifications is under review." Maya felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. She'd never wanted to destroy careers or shut down facilities. She just wanted to compete fairly. But actions had consequences, and the protection industry was finally being forced to confront its culture problem. The conversation continued with an unexpected offer. "The association would like to invite you to join our standards committee. We're working to make professional assessments more objective and equitable, and your experience, both as an analyst and as a practitioner, would be invaluable." Maya accepted immediately. If her victory could help other women and minorities avoid the treatment she'd received, then every moment of harassment had been worth it. The most dramatic fallout involved Jackson Reed. His sponsors began distancing themselves from him after video clips show his unsportsmanlike conduct and disrespectful comments. By Thursday, 2 major tactical equipment manufacturers had terminated their endorsement deals, citing values misalignment and unprofessional behavior. Jackson's downfall accelerated when investigative journalists began digging into his background. They discovered a pattern of complaints from female trainees at his tactical academy, allegations of inappropriate comments, dismissive instruction, and creating hostile environments that had been quietly settled or ignored. Maya learned about Jackson's troubles from Elena Rodriguez, who called her Thursday evening with an update on the protection community's response. "Word is spreading fast," Elena reported. "A lot of people are finally speaking up about behavior they've tolerated for years. Your victory didn't just win a certification. It gave people permission to demand better." "I never intended for any of this," Maya said, though she felt more satisfaction than regret. "That's exactly why it matters," Elena replied. "You weren't looking for revenge or trying to destroy anyone. You just wanted to compete fairly and let your abilities speak for themselves. Sometimes that's the most powerful statement of all." The vindication continued throughout the week. Cameron Scott, the social media influencer who had mocked her traditional approach, posted a public apology video that quickly became a case study in how not to handle controversy. His awkward, clearly scripted remarks about learning and growing fooled no one and became the subject of countless parody videos. Victor Sullivan, the announcer who had turned her struggles into entertainment, found himself facing a different kind of accountability. The Blackstone facility terminated his contract, and several other venues began reconsidering their relationships with him. His attempts at damage control, claiming he'd been building drama for entertainment value only, made things worse. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from unexpected sources. Maya began receiving messages from young women across the country who had been inspired by her performance. Self-defense students, criminal justice majors, and aspiring security professionals all reached out to share their own stories and ask for advice. One message particularly moved her. It came from Sophia Williams, the teenage girl who had approached her after the assessment. "Ms. Chen, I wanted you to know that I joined my school's competition team this week. When the coach said girls usually don't compete in the advanced division, I told him about you and showed him the video of your assessment. He changed his tune pretty quickly. Thank you for showing us what's possible." Friday brought the most satisfying development of all. Maya received an official letter from the Blackstone Academy Board of Directors, the same organization that had allowed her harassment to continue unchallenged. The letter was both an apology and an invitation. "Dear Ms. Chen," it read, "the board wishes to formally apologize for the unacceptable treatment you received during our recent assessment. We are implementing comprehensive policy changes to ensure all candidates are treated with respect and professionalism. Additionally, we would like to invite you to serve as our technical advisor for future assessments and to consider Blackstone Academy as a potential venue for a protection techniques clinic or training program you might wish to develop." Maya set the letter aside with a smile. The same people who had dismissed her as a diversity stunt were now begging for her expertise and association. The transformation was complete, from unwanted outsider to sought-after expert in the span of a single perfect demonstration. As she prepared to leave work that Friday, Maya opened her desk drawer and pulled out her grandfather's notebook. She turned to a blank page and wrote a single line. "Mission accomplished, grandfather. The technique was perfect." Outside her office window, the Chicago sunset painted the skyline in shades of gold and crimson. Maya gathered her things and headed home, already planning her next challenge. She had a certification to honor, a legacy to uphold, and an industry to change, one precise technique at a time. 6 months after her victory at Blackstone Academy, Maya Chen stood before a packed auditorium at the International Protection Specialists Association's annual conference. The audience included security directors, equipment manufacturers, government trainers, and protection specialists from across the globe, many of whom were implementing changes directly inspired by her experience. Excellence doesn't ask for permission, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. It doesn't wait for approval or acceptance. It simply performs consistently and precisely until the world has no choice but to acknowledge what was always true. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 2 minutes. Maya looked out at the crowd, noting faces she recognized. Elena Rodriguez in the front row beaming with pride. Dr. Wilson from Meridian Dynamics taking notes for the company's training initiatives, even Richard Blackwell from the IPS, nodding in approval. Notably absent were Jackson Reed and Cameron Scott, both of whom had largely disappeared from the protection community. Jackson's Tactical Academy had folded after numerous clients canceled contracts, and Cameron's social media presence had dwindled to almost nothing. They had become cautionary tales about the cost of prejudice in a profession that increasingly valued objectivity and results. Maya's keynote address covered the technical aspects of modern protection, but her real message was about perseverance and the power of preparation. She shared the psychological principles behind her record-breaking demonstration, but also the emotional journey that had brought her to that moment. "My grandfather taught me that combat was applied physics," she explained, "but he also taught me that physics doesn't care about your size, your gender, your background, or whether other people believe you belong. Momentum affects everyone equally. Joint locks follow the same principles for everybody. Excellence is measurable, objective, and ultimately undeniable." After her speech, Maya was approached by dozens of audience members, young women seeking mentorship, security directors asking for consultation on inclusive policies, and equipment manufacturers interested in collaborating with someone who understood both the technical and human sides of protection. The most meaningful conversation came with Commander David Chun, a Navy SEAL who ran specialized close protection training for military personnel. "Miss Chun, I've been following your work since Blackstone," Commander Chun said. "We're reforming our selection protocols to be more objective and less biased toward traditional physical profiles. Would you consider consulting on our program development?" Maya accepted immediately. Working with military special operations would complete a circle, begun by her grandfather's service in Hong Kong and continued through her own dedication to the craft he'd taught her. Later that evening, at the conference's awards banquet, Maya received the IPS ACE First Ever Excellence in Innovation Award. As she accepted the crystal trophy, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from a dismissed diversity hire to a recognized leader in her field. But the real measure of her impact wasn't in awards or recognition. It was in the changes she could see throughout the protection community. Academies were implementing blind assessment protocols. Competitions were training officials to recognize and address bias. Most importantly, women and smaller-statured individuals were entering the profession in record numbers, inspired by the example Maya had set. Elena Rodriguez, now serving as Maya's unofficial mentor and frequent collaborator, joined her at the hotel bar after the ceremony. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said, raising her glass. "Not just of the technique, but of what you've done with the platform it gave you." Maya smiled, touching the jade pendant around her neck, her grandfather's final gift before he passed. "He always said one good demonstration could change everything. I just never realized he meant more than just winning competitions." As they talked, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Sophia Williams, now the captain of her school's competition team. The message included a photo of Sophia holding a trophy from a recent tournament, along with the words, "Following in your footsteps, made it to nationals. Thank you for showing me what's possible." Maya showed the photo to Elena, who nodded approvingly. That's the real victory right there. Not the certifications or the contracts or the speaking fees. It's knowing that other people get to benefit from the path you cleared. A year later, Maya published a book titled The Physics of Protection: Technique, Psychology, and Breaking Barriers. It became required reading at several law enforcement academies and was translated into multiple languages. The proceeds funded a scholarship program for underrepresented students pursuing careers in security and protection. She also established the Chun Protection Institute, a training facility that focused on both technical excellence and inclusive instruction. The institute's motto, inscribed above the entrance in her grandfather's handwriting, read, "Excellence needs no permission." Jackson Reed eventually attempted a comeback, posting YouTube videos about learning from mistakes and growing as a person, but his audience had moved on, finding inspiration in authentic voices rather than manufactured redemption narratives. He faded into obscurity, a forgotten footnote in a story about genuine transformation. Maya continued evolving professionally, developing new training programs and setting 2 industry standards for objective assessment protocols. But her greatest satisfaction came from the letters she received from young women who had entered protection careers because they'd seen her example, women who were now instructors, operators, and leaders in their own right, on quiet evenings. In her Chicago apartment, Maya would often sit by the window with her grandfather's notebook, reading the careful notations and remembering the patient lessons that had shaped her life. The physics had always been perfect. It just took the right moment, the right pressure, and the right demonstration to prove it to the world. In her training facility, students of all sizes practiced techniques that emphasized leverage and positioning over brute strength. They were learning what Maya had always known, that protection excellence wasn't about intimidation or physical dominance. It was about understanding human mechanics, reading intentions, and applying the right technique at exactly the right moment. Maya smiled, closed the notebook, and prepared to honor the legacy one more time. Her students were waiting. The principles were clear, and the future of protection was exactly where it needed to be, in the hands of those who understood that excellence could come in any size. 5 years after Blackstone Academy, the executive protection community was fundamentally transformed. Maya Chen's perfect demonstration had done more than win a certification. It had shattered barriers, changed policies, and inspired a generation of specialists who might never have found their place in the profession otherwise. The annual Maya Chen Invitational, held each spring at what was now called the International Protection Academy, formerly Blackstone, had become one of the most prestigious events in the security world. Unlike traditional assessments, it emphasized both technical excellence and ethical conduct, with zero tolerance for discrimination or harassment. Maya herself had evolved from competitor to thought leader, from analyst to educator, from victim of prejudice to architect of change. Her grandfather's lessons in physics and psychology had become the foundation for something larger, a movement that proved excellence could not be diminished by bias, only delayed until its moment arrived. Standing at the entrance of her institute, during the 5th Annual Protection Psychology Symposium, watching specialists of all sizes, genders, and backgrounds learn side by side in an atmosphere of mutual respect, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her here. One demonstration had changed everything, just as her grandfather had always said it could. The attackers had been formidable, the techniques had been perfect, the time had been under 10 seconds, but the real distance covered had been measured not in physical space, but in minds changed, barriers broken, and dreams made possible. For those who came after, excellence, as it turned out, was indeed eternal. The story of Maya Chen's transformation from underestimated analyst to industry pioneer reached far beyond the protection community. A decade after that pivotal day at Blackstone Academy, her impact resonated across multiple fields, from law enforcement to corporate security, from military training to educational reform. What had begun as one woman's journey to validate her skills had become a catalyst for reimagining excellence in protection worldwide. On a crisp autumn morning, Maya stood at the center of the Chen Institute's main training floor, observing as 30 protection specialists from 12 countries moved through advanced scenarios. What made this particular cohort special wasn't just their international diversity, but their physical diversity. The participants ranged from a 5'0" former gymnast to a 6'7" former basketball player, each bringing unique attributes to the protection profession. Notice how Singh uses his height advantage for surveillance, Maya pointed out to her assistant instructors, while Rodriguez leverages her lower center of gravity for close-quarters control techniques. Different physical attributes, equally effective outcomes. The Chen method, as it had come to be known, wasn't about forcing everyone into the same tactical approach, but about helping each specialist optimize their unique physical and psychological advantages. This adaptive philosophy had revolutionized how protection was taught, assessed, and implemented globally. Maya's phone buzzed with a notification. The International Protection Standards Commission had just unanimously approved the Chen assessment protocol as the new global standard for certification. After years of advocacy, the protection industry would finally have an objective, bias-free evaluation system that measured actual capability rather than conformity to traditional physical stereotypes. As she scrolled through the confirmation email, another notification appeared. An invitation to the White House. The President's security detail was implementing Maya's behavioral analysis training program, and they wanted her to personally oversee the transition. It would be the highest profile implementation of her methodology to date. Looks like Washington finally caught up, remarked Alina Rodriguez, now the Chen Institute's director of training and Maya's closest professional ally. Only took them 10 years to realize what we've been saying all along. Maya smiled. Change happens one mind at a time. Sometimes the biggest institutions are the slowest to evolve. Elena nodded toward the training floor where a petite woman was effortlessly controlling a much larger attacker using the precision joint manipulation technique that had become Maya's signature. Speaking of evolution, your 3 o'clock appointment arrived early. She's waiting in your office. Maya felt a flutter of anticipation. Today's meeting was particularly meaningful, one that connected her past to the profession's future in an unexpected way. In her office, Maya found Sophia Williams, no longer the awestruck teenager from the Blackstone assessment, but a poised young woman in her mid-20s. After being inspired by Maya's demonstration a decade earlier, Sophia had pursued protection training with single-minded determination, eventually earning scholarships to study both psychology and kinesiology. Professor Chen, Sophia stood to greet her mentor, extending her hand professionally. Thank you for making time in your schedule. For my first scholarship recipient who's now created her own revolutionary training program. I think I can. Spare a few minutes, Maya replied warmly, gesturing for Sophia to sit. Tell me about this adaptive protection system you've developed. Sophia's eyes lit up as she opened her tablet, displaying a sophisticated training algorithm that customized protection techniques based on individual physical attributes and psychological profiles. It builds on your foundational work, Sophia explained, but incorporates neuroplasticity research to accelerate skill acquisition for non-traditional protection specialists. The preliminary results are exceeding our expectations. We're seeing skill development rates 40% faster than conventional methods. As Sophia walked through her research findings, Maya felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This was the true measure of her impact, not just changing the industry herself, but empowering the next generation to push boundaries even further. Sophia wasn't just following in Maya's footsteps. She was blazing new trails altogether. The Pentagon has expressed interest, Sophia continued, especially for specialized units where traditional physical profiles aren't always optimal. They're particularly interested in the applications for covert protection details where blending in is more valuable than physical intimidation. Maya nodded thoughtfully. This could revolutionize how we think about specialized protection entirely. Have you considered the diplomatic security applications? Their conversation flowed seamlessly from technical details to broader implications. Two innovators separated by a generation, but united by a shared vision of excellence without limitations. As they wrapped up, Maya made a decision. "I'd like to offer you a position here," she said. "Director of Innovation. Full research support, your own development team, and complete academic freedom to advance this work." Sophia looked stunned. "But what about my Pentagon proposal?" "They can wait," Maya smiled. "Or better yet, they can come to us. What you're developing deserves the proper foundation. The Chun Institute can provide that." After Sophia left, Maya turned to the panoramic window overlooking Chicago's skyline. The city had changed over the decade, new skyscrapers rising alongside the classics, much like the protection industry itself, evolving while maintaining its core purpose. Her reflection showed a woman transformed as well. At 42, Maya carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove, yet continued, pushing boundaries from intrinsic motivation rather than external validation. The younger Maya had fought for recognition. The current Maya fought for evolution. That evening, the Chun Institute hosted its annual Industry Innovation Gala, bringing together the most forward-thinking minds in protection, security, and behavioral analysis. As founder and keynote speaker, Maya surveyed the diverse crowd from the podium, a stark contrast to the homogeneous audience she'd faced at that Blackstone conference a decade earlier. 10 years ago, she began, I stood before an industry that questioned whether someone of my stature belonged in protection. Today, I stand before an industry that questions only capability, not appearance. This transformation didn't happen because one person disarmed 4 attackers in under 10 seconds. It happened because thousands of professionals committed to measuring excellence by results rather than preconceptions. The applause was immediate, but Maya raised her hand for quiet. But our work isn't finished. Tonight, I'm announcing the Adaptive Protection Initiative, a global research collaborative dedicated to developing protection methodologies for individuals with physical disabilities, neurodivergent profiles, and other historically excluded groups. Excellence doesn't conform to a single profile. It adapts, innovates, and transcends limitations. The announcement generated excited murmurs throughout the hall. Maya continued, the initiative's first director will be Sophia Williams, whose groundbreaking work in adaptive protection training has already caught the attention of international security agencies. Sophia, seated at a front table, looked surprised at the public announcement, but stood to acknowledge the applause with graceful composure. Additionally, Maya continued, the Chun Foundation is establishing 50 new scholarships for protection training, specifically targeting candidates from underrepresented backgrounds who demonstrate the analytical thinking and psychological resilience essential to elite protection. As the gala continued, Maya circulated among the attendees, connecting innovation leaders with emerging talents, facilitating the collaborations that would shape the industry's future. She paused briefly at the memorial wall displaying a photograph of her grandfather in his prime, Master Li Chun, demonstrating perfect technique despite his modest stature. Your legacy continues, grandfather, she thought, touching the jade pendant she still wore. Beyond anything we could have imagined. Later that night, as the event wound down, Maya found herself in conversation with Admiral James Richardson, commander of the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Your methods have transformed our selection process, the Admiral acknowledged. We're identifying candidates we would have overlooked entirely under our old standards. Operators who think differently, solve problems creatively, and accomplish missions in ways we hadn't considered. That's the ultimate validation, Maya replied. Not just changing who can become protection specialists, but expanding what protection can accomplish. The Admiral nodded thoughtfully. There's something else we'd like your input on. We're developing a next-generation protection program for high-risk, diplomatic missions, scenarios where traditional security postures actually increase vulnerability by creating visible targets. The psychology of invisibility, Maya noted. Protection that succeeds by not being perceived as protection at all. Exactly, the Admiral confirmed. We'd like you to lead the conceptual development. Full access, complete creative control. Maya considered the proposal. 10 years ago, such an invitation would have been unthinkable. A military elite unit seeking guidance from someone the industry had once dismissed as too small to matter. Now it seemed like the natural evolution of her work. Send me the details, she said. I'll assemble a development team. As the gala's final guests departed, Elena joined Maya on the Institute's rooftop garden, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. To changing an industry, Elena proposed, handing Maya a glass. To changing perceptions, Maya countered, raising her glass in return. They stood in comfortable silence, looking out over the city lights. Elena had been there from the beginning. First as an unexpected ally, then as a mentor, and now as a trusted friend and colleague. Their partnership had helped transform protection training from a field that emphasized physical intimidation to one that valued psychological insight equally. I saw Jackson Reed's new video series, Elena mentioned casually. He's rebranding himself as an advocate for inclusive protection training. Maya laughed softly. Adaptation is the ultimate survival skill. At least he's finally promoting the right approach, even if it took losing everything to get there. Speaking of adaptation, Elena continued, the applications for next year's certification program broke all records. Over 40% are women, and we've got candidates from 28 countries. Your grandfather would never have imagined this when he was teaching you in that tiny Chicago apartment. Maya smiled at the memory of those early training sessions. Her grandfather patiently explaining leverage principles, using kitchen utensils when they couldn't afford proper training equipment. From those humble beginnings to revolutionizing an entire industry, the journey seemed almost unbelievable. He knew what was possible, Maya replied. He just didn't know how many barriers we'd have to break along the way. The following morning, Maya arrived early at the Institute, finding a young man waiting nervously in the reception area. She recognized him immediately, Michael Chen, her cousin's son, recently graduated from university and unsure of his path forward. Aunt Maya, he said, standing quickly. Thank you for seeing me. Maya led him to her office, curious about this unexpected visit. Michael had always been academically gifted, but physically unimposing, much like Maya herself at his age. I've been thinking about what I want to do with my life, Michael began hesitantly. Everyone expects me to pursue academics or technology because of my size, but I've always been drawn to protection work. After seeing what you've accomplished, I thought maybe. Maya studied her grandnephew thoughtfully. The family resemblance was striking, not just in physical appearance, but in the determined set of his jaw, the analytical precision in his gaze. Protection isn't about how you look, she said. It's about how you think, how you analyze, how you prepare. Great-grandfather understood that when he trained me, and I understood it when I transformed this industry. She reached into her desk drawer and removed a worn notebook, her grandfather's original training journal, with his meticulous notes on technique, psychology, and the physics of protection. This belongs to you now, she said, handing it to Michael. Not because you're entitled to it, but because you're ready to build upon it. The Chen legacy isn't about preserving the past. It's about evolving for the future. Michael accepted the notebook reverently, understanding its significance. There's a training cohort starting next month, Maya continued. If you're serious about this path, you'll start there. No special treatment, no shortcuts. Excellence demands full commitment. Michael nodded, his expression resolute. I won't disappoint you. It's not about disappointing me, Maya corrected gently. It's about honoring your own potential. Size doesn't determine capability, preparation, and mindset do. As Michael left, Maya reflected on how completely the cycle had turned. From being mocked and underestimated to mentoring the next generation of her own family in the principles that had transformed an industry. The Chen legacy had become something far greater than one family's martial tradition. It had become a global philosophy of excellence without limitations. That afternoon, Maya led a master class for international protection directors, demonstrating how traditional techniques could be adapted for modern threats. As she moved through precision control methods that required minimal physical strength, but maximum mental focus, she noticed Michael observing from the back of the room, the old notebook open in his hands. Protection excellence isn't about intimidation, she explained to the class. It's about precise application of technique at exactly the right moment. It's about reading intention before action. It's about understanding that the most effective protection often comes from unexpected sources. To demonstrate, she invited the largest participant, a 6'5" former football player, now heading executive protection for a multinational corporation, to attempt to reach a protected principle, using any approach he chose. What followed was a 30-second masterclass in positional awareness, predictive movement, and precise control techniques. Despite the massive size difference, the executive never came close to his objective. Maya's positioning was flawless. Her timing impeccable, her technique absolutely precise. Size creates an illusion of advantage, she explained afterward. But protection isn't about illusions, it's about results. Judge capability by performance, not appearance. As the class ended, Maya noticed Michael's expression, the same mixture of awe and determination she had felt watching her grandfather decades earlier. The cycle continued, not just for her family, but for an entire profession that had learned to value substance over appearance. 15 years after Blackstone Academy, Maya Chen's impact extended well beyond the protection industry. Her methodologies had been adopted by law enforcement agencies in 27 countries. Her behavioral analysis protocols had become standard curriculum in psychology programs worldwide. The Chen certification was now the gold standard for elite protection specialists on every continent. More importantly, the fundamental perception of what made an effective protector had evolved. Size and physical intimidation were no longer considered primary qualifications. Instead, analytical thinking, situational awareness, and adaptive technique became the recognized foundations of elite protection. Standing before the United Nations Security Council as they prepared to adopt her protection standards globally, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From being mocked for her size to reshaping international security protocols, the transformation seemed almost impossible to comprehend. Protection excellence knows no physical profile, she told the assembled representatives. It recognizes no gender limitations. It acknowledges no predetermined criteria beyond demonstrated capability. When we measure performance rather than appearance, we discover excellence in unexpected places. As the resolution passed unanimously, Maya thought of that day at Blackstone Academy when 4 attackers had rushed her simultaneously, expecting an easy victory. She'd had 10 seconds to prove a lifetime of preparation. 10 seconds to challenge decades of industry preconceptions. 10 seconds to demonstrate that excellence needed no permission to announce itself. Sometimes transformation happened in the span of 10 seconds. Sometimes it took 15 years of persistent advocacy. But once excellence was demonstrated, it could never be unseen. The legacy of Maya Chen wasn't just about protection techniques or assessment protocols. It was about the fundamental principle that capacity couldn't be judged by appearance. That excellence often came in unexpected packages, and that true security emerged from diversity of approach rather than uniformity of profile. In the end, the most powerful protection wasn't built on intimidation but on precision, not on conformity but on innovation, not on physical dominance but on intellectual preparation. Maya hadn't just changed an industry. She'd transformed how capability itself was measured. Her grandfather had been right all along. Protection wasn't about size, it was about science. It wasn't about appearance, it was about application. And most importantly, it wasn't about meeting expectations, it was about transcending them entirely. Excellence, as it turned out, had never been about permission. It had always been about performance. And once demonstrated, it could never be denied again. If you enjoyed this story of quiet strength triumphing over prejudice, don't forget to subscribe to our Everyday Life Stories channel. We share real accounts of courage, perseverance, and the incredible power of never giving up on yourself. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our viewers around the world. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to prove yourself against unfair odds? Share your story with us. Your experience might inspire someone who needs to hear it right now. Stay tuned for more inspiring stories that celebrate the unsung heroes in everyday life. Remember, sometimes the most powerful victories come not from the loudest voices, but from the most precise hands and the most determined hearts. 20 years after that transformative moment at Blackstone Academy, Maya Chen found herself standing at the podium of the Global Security Summit in Singapore, delivering the keynote address to an audience that represented every aspect of the protection industry. The summit's theme, Redefining Excellence, the Next Generation, reflected how completely her philosophy had reshaped the field. As she surveyed the crowd, Maya noticed that nearly half the attendees were women, and the physical diversity was striking, from petite specialists who relied on technique and precision to larger operatives who had incorporated psychological awareness into their approach. This integration of diverse methods had created a protection industry far more sophisticated than the one-dimensional field she'd entered 2 decades earlier. 20 years ago, Maya began. I stood before an assessment panel that judged capability by appearance rather than performance. Today, I stand before a global industry that understands true protection excellence emerges from diversity of approach, perspective, and physical attributes. This evolution didn't happen overnight. It happened through thousands of individual demonstrations that excellence comes in all sizes. The audience nodded in recognition. Many had heard pieces of Maya's story, but few knew the complete journey that had transformed both her life and their profession. The future of protection isn't about maintaining what we've built, she continued. It's about continued evolution. Today I'm announcing the formation of the Global Adaptive Protection Consortium, an international collaboration that will bring together the world's most innovative protection specialists to develop the next generation of techniques, technologies, and training methodologies. The announcement generated enthusiastic applause, particularly from the younger members of the audience. Maya had become more than just an industry leader. She had become a symbol of possibility for anyone who'd ever been told they didn't fit the traditional mold. After her keynote, Maya found herself surrounded by protection specialists eager to share how her methods had transformed their careers. A slight woman from Israel's diplomatic security service described how the Chen method had allowed her to outperform physically larger counterparts in assessment scenarios. A wheelchair-using specialist from Germany, explained how adaptive techniques had enabled him to provide executive protection despite mobility differences. Each story reinforced what Maya had always believed, that excellence transcended physical stereotypes when given the opportunity to demonstrate itself. As the crowd dispersed for afternoon breakout sessions, Maya noticed a familiar face approaching Jackson Reed, his once commanding presence now tempered by 20 years and a humbling fall from grace. After his tactical academy collapsed, Jackson had spent years rebuilding his reputation, eventually reinventing himself as an advocate for adaptive protection techniques. Maya, he acknowledged with a nod that contained both respect and lingering discomfort. Powerful keynote. "Thank you, Jackson," she replied evenly. "I noticed your session on reconsidering traditional protection profiles is scheduled for tomorrow. Planning to attend?" Jackson shifted uncomfortably. "I've been meaning to speak with you about that. My presentation, well, it essentially validates everything you've been saying for 2 decades. I'd understand if you found that ironic." Maya studied the man who had once been her most vocal critic. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something resembling wisdom. "Evolution isn't ironic, Jackson. It's necessary. The question isn't who was right 20 years ago, it's who's moving the field forward today." Relief flickered across his face. "I appreciate that perspective. The truth is, I've spent years studying your methods, and they're objectively superior to what I was teaching. It took losing everything for me to see past my own biases. Sometimes transformation requires disruption," Maya observed. The protection industry needed to be shaken out of complacency. As they parted ways, Maya reflected on the complex journey that had brought them both to this point. Jackson's transformation from antagonist to advocate represented the broader evolution of an entire industry, reluctant at first, then gradually accepting, and finally embracing a more inclusive definition of excellence. That evening, at a private reception for keynote speakers, Maya met Jasmine Torres, the newly appointed security director for the United Nations, the youngest person and first woman to hold the position. Jasmine had completed her initial training at the Chun Institute 10 years earlier, part of the first generation of protection specialists who had never known the field as it existed before Maya's influence. "Your methods literally saved lives last month," Jasmine revealed, referring to a complex protection scenario in Eastern Europe. "Our team included specialists ranging from 5'2" to 6'4", with diverse physical capabilities. That diversity became our greatest asset when extracting diplomatic personnel during the crisis. The traditional approach would have failed completely." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "Adaptability always outperforms standardization in complex scenarios. Your team succeeded because they approached the situation from multiple perspectives, rather than a single tactical doctrine." "Exactly," Jasmine agreed. "But I didn't come here just to share success stories. I have a proposal that might interest you." She outlined an ambitious initiative to establish regional training centers based on the Chen method across 5 continents, making adaptive protection training accessible to security services regardless of economic resources. "The UN Security Council has approved initial funding," Jasmine explained. "But we need your expertise to develop standardized curriculum that can be adapted for different cultural contexts while maintaining core principles." The proposal represented everything Maya had worked toward, not just changing how protection was practiced in elite circles, but democratizing access to advanced methodologies worldwide. It would mean scaling her approach beyond anything she had previously attempted. "This could transform regional security dynamics globally," Maya observed. "When protection excellence is measured by performance rather than appearance, entire communities benefit from increased security capacity." They spent the next hour outlining framework principles for the initiative, 2 pioneers separated by a generation, but united by a shared vision of protection excellence without artificial limitations. The following morning brought another meaningful encounter. As Maya prepared for her masterclass demonstration, a young man approached her warmly. Dr. Michael Chen, no longer the uncertain youth who had sought her guidance a decade earlier, but now the director of behavioral analysis at the Chen Institute and a respected researcher in his own right. "I just received confirmation," Michael announced excitedly. "The longitudinal study results are even more significant than we anticipated. 5 years of data from 12 countries show that protection teams with diverse physical profiles consistently outperform homogeneous teams in complex scenarios. The performance gap increases with scenario complexity." Maya felt a surge of satisfaction. Anecdotal evidence had supported her methods for years, but this represented rigorous scientific validation across multiple cultures and protection contexts. "The journal is fast-tracking publication," Michael continued. "They're calling it a paradigm-shifting study for the protection industry." "Your great-grandfather would be proud," Maya said. "He understood the science behind these principles long before we had the data to prove it." Michael nodded, his expression reflective. "Sometimes I wonder what he would think of how far his teachings have spread, from that small apartment in Chicago to international security doctrine." "He would recognize the underlying principles," Maya replied. "The applications have evolved, but the foundational understanding that effectiveness comes from precision rather than power that remains unchanged." Later that day, Maya led an advanced demonstration for elite protection specialists, showcasing techniques that required minimal physical strength, but maximum situational awareness and psychological insight. As she effortlessly redirected attacks from multiple directions, the audience watched in respectful silence, recognizing they were witnessing the culmination of decades of refinement. "Protection excellence isn't about dominating space," Maya explained as she completed the demonstration. "It's about controlling critical points of leverage. It's about reading intention before action becomes threat. Most importantly, it's about understanding that the most effective response is rarely the most obvious one." The demonstration concluded with spontaneous applause from specialists who represented the world's most prestigious protection units, a far cry from the mockery she had faced at Blackstone Academy 2 decades earlier. As the summit continued, Maya participated in a panel discussion with pioneers from different protection disciplines. The conversation turned to future challenges, how artificial intelligence was changing threat assessment, how climate disruption was creating new security paradigms, how protection principles needed to evolve for increasingly complex global environments. "The protection field faces a critical inflection point," noted General Tomás Reyes, former commander of Spain's Special Operations Forces. "We've moved beyond the physical stereotypes that once limited our perspective, but now we must adapt to threats that are increasingly asymmetric and technologically sophisticated. That adaptation requires cognitive diversity as much as physical diversity," Maya responded. "The next evolution in protection excellence will come from integrating perspectives across disciplines: psychology, technology, environmental science, cultural anthropology. The most effective protection specialists won't just have diverse physical profiles, they'll have diverse thinking profiles." The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours, ranging from philosophical principles to practical applications, each participant building upon the others' insights to create a vision for the industry's future that transcended traditional boundaries. That evening, at the summit's formal banquet, Maya received the Lifetime Achievement Award, a recognition that typically went to specialists at the end of their careers. At 52, Maya was the youngest recipient in the award's history, a testament to the profound impact she had already made on the profession. As she accepted the crystal sculpture, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment, from being dismissed as too small to matter to being recognized as the defining voice of her generation in protection excellence. "This award honors more than one person's contributions," she told the audience. It honors a fundamental shift in how we define capability. 20 years ago, I stood before an assessment panel that couldn't see past physical appearance to recognize actual skill. Today, I stand before a global community that measures excellence by what matters: performance, adaptability, and results. The standing ovation lasted nearly 3 minutes, led by specialists from every tradition and background, united in their recognition of how completely Maya had transformed their field. After the ceremony, Maya found a quiet moment on the venue's terrace overlooking Singapore's spectacular skyline. The city-state's evolution from small fishing village to global powerhouse seemed an appropriate metaphor for her own journey transformation, driven by vision rather than initial advantages. Elena Rodriguez joined her, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever. After decades as Maya's closest professional ally, Elena had recently stepped back from daily operations at the Chen Institute to focus on mentoring emerging talents. Not bad for someone who was told she took a wrong turn at the women's self-defense class, Elena remarked with a smile, referencing Jackson Reed's dismissive comment from 20 years earlier. Maya laughed softly. Sometimes the wrong turns lead exactly where you need to go. They stood in comfortable silence, two pioneers who had watched an industry transform around them, first resistant, then curious, and finally embracing principles they had advocated when few would listen. "I received an interesting message today," Elena said after a moment. Diana Reeves reached out. Maya raised an eyebrow in surprise. The former Blackstone assessment director had disappeared from the industry after her suspension, eventually taking the corporate security position, far removed from the elite protection community. "She's retiring next month," Elena continued. Sighed. "She's been following your work from a distance all these years. Wanted me to tell you that you proved her wrong in the best possible way." Maya absorbed this unexpected closure. "Did she say anything else?" "Just that she's been requiring all her corporate security personnel to train in the Chen method for the past decade. Apparently, she became quite the advocate after she got over her initial resistance. The revelation felt fitting somehow, another full circle in a journey filled with unexpected evolutions. The people who had once been her most vocal critics had, in many cases, become her most dedicated advocates once they experienced the results of her methods firsthand. Transformation rarely happens all at once, Maya observed. It happens person by person, experience by experience, result by result. The summit's final day brought one more significant moment. Maya had been invited to observe the International Protection Championship, where elite specialists from around the world demonstrated their capabilities in complex scenarios. As she entered the observation area, she noticed something remarkable. Nearly half the competitors were women, and the physical diversity among both male and female specialists was striking. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.